War has always been a story about human ambition, human conflict, and human loss. But hidden beneath the weight of history are countless others who served, suffered, and sacrificed without ever being asked for their permission. For as long as people have waged battles, animals have stood beside them, loyal companions in a violent world they could never understand. They carried the wounded, hauled supplies, guided armies through impossible landscapes, and sometimes even shifted the course of a campaign. Among these silent participants, two extraordinary giants, camels and elephants, left a legacy that remains largely invisible in our retellings of the world's greatest conflicts. Their stories stretch across deserts, mountains, jungles, and battlefields. They connect ancient times with modern wars and reveal a side of history that is as heartbreaking as it is inspiring. Long before the First World War tore the world apart, animals had already shaped civilizations. In regions where humans could not survive alone, animals became lifelines. In Central Asia, camel caravans snaked across thousands of miles of desert, carrying silk, spices, and metals. In the forests of Burma, elephants carved pathways, moved timber, and built entire industries. Their labor made trade possible, sustained empires, and connected continents. When the Great War, as it was then called, erupted in 1914, the world was thrust into a modern conflict fueled by machine guns, barbed wire, and artillery. Yet technology alone could not win battles. Much of the world's terrain remained beyond the reach of automobiles and engines. Deserts were too soft, mountains too steep, jungles too dense. In those places, ancient partnerships between humans and animals resurfaced with new urgency. Of all creatures enlisted into service, camels may have been the most perfectly adapted to their wartime roles. They were not majestic in the traditional sense. Their long legs, towering height, and silent, swaying gait often seemed awkward to those unaccustomed to them. But within their uniquely designed bodies lived evolution's most brilliant desert survival toolkit. They could withstand conditions that would kill many other animals. Their humps stored fat for lean times. Their bodies regulated heat in ways that baffled scientists. Their large, leathery mouths could chew thorny plants and cacti. Their lungs filtered sand. Their feet carried them lightly over dunes where trucks would sink instantly. In antiquity, camel cavalry units terrified enemy armies. Horses, unfamiliar with the scent of camels, often panicked or bolted at their presence. Armies from Mesopotamia to Persia used camel-mounted troops to overwhelm opponents who depended on cavalry. But modern wars required different skills. Instead of charging into battle, camels became the backbone of long-range logistics. The Imperial Camel Corps, formed by the British in 1916, exemplified this transformation. The unit included soldiers from across the empire, Australians in slouch hats, New Zealanders hardened by rural life, Indian troops with generations of desert tradition, and British soldiers often encountering camels for the first time. These men rode for days across sun-scorched plains, carrying rifles, water, ammunition, and tents. Their missions required silence and endurance, both from the soldiers and their animals. Daily life in the Camel Corps was a strange mixture of hardship and routine. Soldiers learned to mount camels quickly, to sit through long hours of swaying movement, and to endure the sudden temperamental bursts that camels were notorious for. But they also developed a deep respect for their mounts. In the lonely expanse of the Sinai Desert, or the rolling dunes of Palestine, soldiers and camels shared a bond born of survival. One of the most remarkable wartime innovations was the camel cacolet, a stretcher-like structure strapped to the sides of a camel. In regions where even horses or wheeled ambulances could not pass, camels became mobile hospitals. They transported the wounded across miles of barren sand. The journey was not comfortable. The constant rocking motion caused pain and nausea. Yet, for many soldiers, a camel-mounted evacuation meant the difference between life and death. Across the Atlantic, the deserts of the American Southwest inspired their own camel experiment decades earlier. The U.S. Army's mid-19th century Camel Corps was motivated by a desire to navigate harsh, arid lands. Major Henry Wayne and Naval Officer David Dixon Porter traveled to the Mediterranean, purchased dozens of camels, and transported them to Texas. For a few years, the camels exceeded all expectations. They carried heavy loads, moved quickly, and survived the brutal climate. But their presence startled horses, angered mules, and confused soldiers. The outbreak of the Civil War ended the project abruptly. Some camels were sold, others escaped, and for generations travelers reported spotting wild camels wandering the plains, a strange, ghost-like reminder of an abandoned military dream. During the Second World War, camels appeared again in unexpected places. Italian forces used them in Libya. German troops on the Eastern Front encountered local people using camels to move goods. The Soviets pressed Bactrian camels into military service, where mechanical vehicles failed. And it was on those frozen steppes, where bitter winds whipped across empty land, that the camel named Kuznechik entered the wartime record. Kuznechik belonged to the Soviet 308th Rifle Division, later renamed the 120th Guards Rifle Division. Photographs show him calmly chewing, while artillery fires in the distance, or trudging along muddy roads with sacks of ammunition strapped to his humps. Soldiers trusted him. They fed him whatever they could. In return, he carried burdens no man could endure. Rumors spread that Kuznechik followed Soviet troops all the way to Berlin at the end of the war, even spitting on the damaged Reichstag, a symbolic gesture for a beast who had endured so much. Whether that story is true or myth, his presence remains one of the most curious and beloved animal tales of World War II. While camels crossed deserts and steppes, a different drama unfolded in the jungles of Asia. There, the elephant, massive, intelligent, compassionate, played roles no machine could fill. Elephants had a long military legacy. Ancient Hindu texts describe war elephants trampling enemy lines. Hannibal famously crossed the Alps with a contingent of battle elephants. Yet by the 20th century, their role had shifted from shock troops to heavy laborers. In World War I, elephants pulled wagons, plowed fields, and replaced horses that had been drafted into military service. Germany used circus elephants to move artillery. After transport, animals grew scarce. Britain employed elephants to remove rubble after air raids, their great trunks lifting beams and debris with surprising delicacy. But it was in Burma during World War II that elephants faced their greatest test. When Japanese forces invaded the region in 1942, entire villages fled into the jungle. Monsoon rains turned rivers into deadly torrents. Roads disappeared under mudslides. Armies stalled and civilians became stranded. Enter Gyles Mackrell, a British tea planter who owned a small team of working elephants. When he learned that soldiers and refugees were trapped near the swollen Dapha River, he set out on a rescue mission that bordered on impossible. For days, he trudged through thick jungle, accompanied only by mahouts and elephants. When they reached the river, the sight was grim. Survivors clung to small islands of mud, surrounded by rushing torrents. Mackerel's elephants stepped into the water without fear. Their trunks rose like snorkels, their massive bodies pushing through the violent current. One by one, they ferried people to the riverbank: British soldiers, Indian fighters, Burmese civilians, children. By the end of the operation, more than 200 lives had been saved. Another extraordinary figure was James Howard Williams, known worldwide as Elephant Bill. Williams spent years studying elephant behavior in Burma's teak forests. When war erupted, he joined British Force 136, using his deep knowledge to organize elephant transport teams that supported Allied operations. Under his direction, elephants built bridges, cleared forests, and carved emergency airstrips out of solid jungle. They even smuggled weapons through dense terrain that vehicles could not penetrate. At the center of Williams's story was an elephant named Bandoola. Raised by the gentle Mahout Po Tok, Bandoola was renowned for his intelligence and calm demeanor. The bond between Williams and Bandoola was extraordinary, almost human in its depth. Together they led caravans of elephants and refugees through treacherous mountain passes. In one of the war's most legendary feats, Bandoola climbed a 270-foot cliff, using rough steps carved into the rock. An entire herd followed him, demonstrating the power of leadership in a species that understood far more than it could express. Bandoola's death, shot by someone he trusted, devastated Williams. He buried the elephant under a giant teak tree, his grief echoing the grief of countless others who lost more than comrades. They lost friends. In the grand sweep of history, the role of animals in war often vanishes beneath dates, battles, and treaties. Yet, their stories remain. They remind us that victory is rarely the product of human effort alone. In the hardest terrains, under the harshest conditions, and in the most desperate moments, animals carried humanity forward, sometimes literally. They never asked for glory. They never understood the cause. But in their quiet way, they shaped the history of the modern world. Their courage deserves to be remembered.